Shalom, Bethel family. Time for our weekly review of our Torah discussion from Shul last week. And we had a talk that was called Prioritizing Your Goodness, or Prioritizing Our Goodness. I started off by telling a little story. Many of you are aware, in Israel, it's constantly with buildings and changing. And this story takes place in Jerusalem, and where a venerable old yeshiva was being building there was being destroyed. They were moving out of town somewhere, and they'd sold the building. And it was quite a story because it really was an old institution and a very well-respected institution. And so a lot of people gathered to see the demolition, including some reporters. And so there's a reporter from the Jerusalem Post, and he sees the oldest rabbi at the yeshiva there looking at the building. He looks very upset. And this rabbi is a known rabbi. He is from the old country. And so the reporter, he wants to try and get some interest for his story. He goes over to the rabbi, and he says, "It's a rough day, huh?" And the rabbi says, yes, it is. And the reporter says, it must be hard, to see this old building, this old yeshiva where so many ancient texts were taught and where great young Jewish minds were molded into some of the great luminaries of our people. This building that housed some wonderful ancient texts, and where new commentaries and ways forward for the Jewish people were discovered and were thought through. I can't imagine how hard that is for you, Rabbi. Will you make a comment? And he kind of came out of his revelry, this old rabbi, and he says, "Was? No, it's not that. I think I left my iPhone in there." So, cute story. Story about priorities. Right? A story that reminds us that even the most righteous among us, even the ones who have their eyes almost always focused on the things that we feel like should be focused on, even those sometimes get distracted by other things like material things or whatever. We get a much more complex image about priorities from this week's parsha. Right? Or last week's parsha was Tavo, and it begins with the command to bring our first fruits to the temple in Jerusalem. It's something that we do on the holiday of Shavuot. And in the commentaries, Nachmanides, the Ramban, points out that there is no correct amount to offer. It never tells us when you bring your first fruits, you should bring this much exactly. So even a tiny bit would suffice, says the Ramban, or you could bring more. Now, I don't know how familiar you are with Jewish practice, but you may have noticed that we leave very few things up to amorphous amounts. We have a measure for everything, whether it's how much food you should eat in order to make motzi on it, or how far you can walk on Shabbat before you've gone to the next town. Everything has a measure. Those measures are sometimes debated, but very rarely are we told, it doesn't matter, whatever the measure is fine. So there's only a handful of practices that actually have this idea that they don't have a specific measure. And there's a famous Mishnah that lists what all those things are. It's from Mishnah Peot 1:1, and it says, these are the things for which there is no measure. The corner of the field, which is left for the poor, right? There's a command that you shouldn't reap the harvest at the corners of your field, but it never says how much is a corner. Is it the last 2 feet or the last 10 feet? It's a big difference in how much grain you're going to end up giving to the poor. So no measure for the corner of your field, no measure for the first fruit offering, which we've been speaking about, no measure for the pilgrimage, when you come and bring things to the temple, no measure for acts of loving kindness or for Torah learning. You can never do too much, or even just a little is enough. So why these 5 things? The way I read it, each one involves giving, but a different form of giving. Right? The corners of our fields are about giving to the poor. The first fruits and the pilgrimage are about giving to religious institutions, right? And in that case, the temple, but can be translated to giving to a synagogue or to Jewish causes today. Acts of loving kindness are about giving to everyone, even beyond our Jewish community. And of course, Torah learning is about giving to oneself. That is taking the time to stimulate oneself intellectually and to carve out our path and to gain wisdom for ourselves. And all of these are good, important aspects of giving in our lives. Yet Judaism doesn't specify how much or how little of each we should do. Right? It is specifically left up to us how to prioritize these different forms of giving, how we prioritize our own goodness. That's a lot of responsibility, and it is difficult to do if we don't know what our priorities are ourselves. Right? We need to know who we are and what is important to us in order to figure out how much time and effort and energy and resources we should give to our religious institutions, how much of each we should give to the poor, or to our own personal journey, or to the general human community at large. We cannot make that decision without understanding ourselves. Sure, it's easy not to make those decisions at all. We can all be distracted, like that rabbi from the story I gave at the beginning, by material things, right? Or we can all be distracted by the constant bombardment we have from the media telling us what we should be concerned about. That's why this time of year, right, the month of Elul and the high holidays, that's why this time is so important. Not only because it is time for us to heal our relationships, but also because it's a time to shut out all that noise and all those other things and really think about how we are occupying the world and filling it with our goodness. How are we deciding to serve our communities and our families and our religious institutions and even ourselves, which might be the hardest one. Some people are so giving, they just completely lose the interest in themselves and realize that until they burn out. Right? It is too simplistic to think that this time of year is about prioritizing good over evil. Hopefully none of us are doing evil, at least not intentionally. Yes, we'll make mistakes, and this time of year is about reviewing those mistakes so we don't make them again. But it is too simplistic to say, in the year to come, I'm going to be good instead of last year when I was bad. Right? No. This is a sophisticated holiday and a sophisticated faith. And the sophisticated question that this Parsha and our faith tells us to ask at this time is, how do I prioritize my goodness? How do I balance what I give, how I give it, and to whom or to what I give it? It is our job over these next couple of weeks to find the proper balance, to prioritize and to move into the year ahead, better prepared to be a positive presence in the world that we all belong to and need to occupy. And so I pray, and you can take this as a Shana Tova message, since I likely won't see many of you again until after the high holidays. May we all find success in this process over the next few days, and then the 10 days of repentance culminating with Yom Kippur. May we all truly review our priorities, truly think about how we occupy the world, how we put our goodness out into the world. And may we all have success in reevaluating and reprioritizing, making ourselves not only good in the year to come, but making us better in the year to come, and through our own actions, helping to make the world better. That is our ultimate goal. I wish you Shana Tova Tikatevu. May you all be sealed, written, and then sealed after Yom Kippur in the book for life. Shana Tova.